We go now to Senator Mark Kelly in Tucson, Arizona. Good morning to you, Senator.
Good morning.
You were one of the lawmakers who met with President Zelenskyy prior to that Oval Office meltdown. Senator Lindsey Graham later told reporters he had warned Zelenskyy, quote, "Don't take the bait." Do you think Zelenskyy took the bait? Is that how you understand what happened?
I think he was cornered and he was bullied in the Oval Office. And Margaret, that just makes us look weak. I think Donald Trump was trying to look tough. J.D. Vance was trying to look tough. The only winner in that exchange is Putin, who's a criminal, who's killing, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians. So it was a sad day for our country. It was a dumpster fire of diplomacy. It should not have been done. That kind of negotiation should not be done in public in front of cameras. When we had our meeting earlier in the day with Zelenskyy, he has this like habitual gratitude. He was very thankful. And the chairman of the Armed Services Committee kicked the cameras out of the room before we started to talk. Mm-hmm. That's the way this should be handled, not what Donald Trump did.
Well, the Treasury Secretary, who was just with us, said you can't get an economic deal without a peace deal first. So it seems the dynamic is changing in terms of what the Trump administration is putting forward here. What was your understanding of what Volodymyr Zelenskyy's concerns were?
Well, I mean, his concern is that he doesn't have a security guarantee and he's being asked to give up minerals, that this is a business deal. Margaret, we're about to celebrate our 250th birthday as a country, and I didn't think we were just in it for the money. I mean, we are a country of values and principles. We stand with our allies. He needs security guarantees. Yeah, I understand this concept of an economic deal and a ceasefire, but the economic deal comes after the ceasefire. None of that makes sense. They need to get in a room, including with the Russians. I mean, have the Russians given any indication that they want peace? Our Treasury Secretary questioned whether Zelenskyy wants peace. Of course he does. Mm-hmm. He has his population being murdered, raped, children are kidnapped. He wants out of this situation. But he's having a hard time, obviously, negotiating this in public. By the way, I mean, his English is not the best. So this is hard for him. To corner him in the Oval Office on that kind of stage was wrong, mm-hmm. and it makes us look weaker as a nation, and it makes us less safe.
You've been to Ukraine a number of times. Our last guest, Mike Turner, has been to Ukraine a number of times as well. Neither the president nor the vice president have it all. J.D. Vance, the vice president, said to Zelenskyy, those are propaganda tours. Is that what you did? Did you go on propaganda tours?
No, I mean, I went into Patriot batteries and, talked to the troops that every night are defending themselves from incoming ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, trying to keep their population alive. I met with soldiers, some of which mm-hmm. are, amputees at this point, and soldiers that just came from the front lines to talk to me in person about what the situation on the ground is. I met with pilots there who were about to get their F-16s, and we talked specifically about, how can you use this airplane in combat? Yeah. I think J.D. Vance, the vice president, with all due respect, it sounds like he's watching videos on the internet. Mm-hmm. And to say to Zelenskyy, you're not being thankful enough? I mean, Zelenskyy thanks the American people all the time. Yeah. And I got to say, Margaret, if we can end this, and I want this to end as much as anybody, but it has to end in a way that the Russians are going to respect. And what was in the Oval Office yesterday was a demonstration of weakness. And I can tell you, Putin does not respect weakness.
I want to ask you about the U.S. border. The number of migrants crossing the southern border illegally in President Trump's first full month in office plunged to a level we haven't seen in 25 years. This is according to data reviewed by CBS. This seems like this is good for your state. Do these numbers prove President Trump's theories right?
Well, I think the numbers being down, that's a good thing. What we need long term is a negotiation with the Republicans on longstanding border policy. What the administration is doing, especially with ICE raids in schools, with flying, repatriating people who often aren't only criminals in military airplanes for intimidation, talking about housing people on Guantanamo. That's for intimidation. It's good the numbers are down. That's a positive thing.
Yeah.
We need a border security agreement. We need legislation. We also need immigration reform. Talk about my state for a second. We've got a lot of dreamers. They deserve a pathway to citizenship. We need a plan for farm workers as well.
Secretary of Defense Hegseth is sending another 3,000 troops to the border, including an aviation battalion and Stryker vehicles, CBS has confirmed. Now, these soldiers aren't allowed to intercept migrants. Do you understand the mission, the intent? You have oversight over armed services, so I wonder how you feel about this.
Well, I don't feel good about it. I mean, the way this should be handled is if we could work together within the United States Senate, Democrats and Republicans, get the Border Patrol more money, hire more Border Patrol agents, give them more resources to do the job they're supposed to do. When you do it with troops, that affects their readiness. This isn't what they're trained to do. Then they don't get to train to do, that Stryker battalion doesn't get to train to do the job that they may need to do one day. Mm-hmm. I don't want to see us in a conflict around the world, anywhere. But what prevents that is for our allies to realize that they're not going to win in a fight. And when they see us doing things like this, police actions with the military, that also is showing the rest of the world that our military is less capable and we are weaker. And that affects everybody's safety.
Lastly, because you sit on the Intelligence Committee, I want to ask you about something President Zelenskyy said. He said in Munich, Ukraine has intel the Russians are sending troops to Belarus to use it as a launch pad militarily into perhaps not just Ukraine, but other European countries. Are you concerned about that?
Well, I am very concerned about what Putin will do next. If he comes out of this and thinks he got a good deal and this was worth his time and effort and loss of life, he doesn't care about Russian soldiers. He obviously doesn't care about the Ukrainians. Yeah, that would be very concerning for me. I was in the Baltic nations, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, earlier this year. They are very concerned. That would be a staging ground for them to attack the Baltics. Understood.
That's why we're watching it so carefully. Senator Kelly, I appreciate your insight. We're going to turn now to Michigan Congressman John James. Good morning to you, Congressman.
Good morning, Margaret.
I want to ask you about what's happening in your state with the economy and tariffs, but just staying on the theme for a moment, I know you have a lot of Ukrainian Americans in your district. You voted in support of last year's Ukraine supplemental. Are you comfortable with the Trump administration's decision to stop recognizing that Russia started the war in Ukraine?
Russia is the aggressor. Putin is a war criminal, and Volodymyr Zelenskyy also fumbled the bag pretty hard. All those things can be true at the exact same time. We absolutely must stand by our allies, but at the exact same time, we also need to make sure that we are giving transparency and accountability to the American people. Under the Biden administration, billions of dollars were given away with very little accountability and no mission, no end state. I'm a combat veteran, and my soldiers expected from me that I would be able to articulate objectives, a mission, and an end state. And the commander-in-chief last time couldn't do that. Yeah. President Trump is doing everything that he can to get a lasting peace, an enduring peace in Eastern Europe and throughout the world. He's already ended one war in the Middle East. I think we should give him a chance to end one in Europe.
Well, I think there's developments on the Mideast front that throw that into question, but we'll keep tracking that. Let me ask you about tariffs and Michigan, because you are really in a unique spot. In the middle of the auto state. This Tuesday, expect tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China. That's what the president said. On March 12th, 25% tariffs on all imported steel and aluminum, no exceptions for trading partners. Auto tariffs in April. What is your district bracing for?
Look, America is open for business, but we are not for sale. Michigan remembers what NAFTA did to us. And over the past 30 years, Mexico's built 11 major automotive plants to only one in the United States. Michigan remembers 900,000 automotive jobs over back in the 90s to 600,000 now. That's over 300,000 lost manufacturing jobs in the automotive sector. Michigan remembers the Great Recession, where 50% of all the jobs lost in all of America were lost in Michigan Michigan alone. And Michigan remembers the harmful EV mandates that have forced compliance rather than actually allowing a regulatory environment that permits innovation. We've lost jobs to Mexico and China. Right now in my district, as you mentioned, the #1 manufacturing district in all the nation, overflow production is not going to Sterling Heights, it's going to Saltillo, Mexico. When you look at the opportunities that are missing us, when you look at the fact that Michigan is seeing its opportunities pass by, enough is enough. Margaret, the status quo is not good enough for Americans, which is why Donald Trump got elected. He's putting Americans first, and frankly, even our allies have not been playing a fair game. Look, free trade is the objective, but fair trade, right?
Yeah, the specific
okay, go ahead.
Tactic here, because you brought up Sterling Heights. The Republican mayor of Sterling Heights, Michael Taylor, your district, says the president's tariffs are the, quote, single biggest threat to our local economy. He's expecting it to be devastating and staggering. This is a Republican saying this about the impact on your district. What's he missing?
What's devastating and staggering is the fact of the matter that we have been taken advantage of for decades. The president, under his original tax plan, lowered corporate tax rates from 35 to 21%, and he's offering lower tax rates to 15% for those who build in the United States of America. We're also looking at energy independence. We're also looking at lowering the regulatory burdens for folks to succeed and excel. But what Democrats are doing is they're going to actually make it more difficult when they vote against these tax reforms for small businesses to excel and for entrepreneurs to get their feet under them. And so regardless of what it is, when you take a look at the EV policies that Joe Biden put in place that actually exacerbated the inflation, just look at work trucks. Work trucks 5 years ago were $15,000 less expensive than they are right now. SUVs, $8,000 less expensive than they are right now.
Did you tell the mayor he's wrong?
That inflation was caused by terrible Democrat policies, and what's that?
So you're telling the mayor he's wrong? I mean, the Ford CEO said at an investor conference last month that 25% tariff would blow a hole in the U.S. industry that we have never seen.
Well, you know what? Memory is kind of short, because when you look at the OECD nations, they're already talking about leveling a 15% tax on anything in businesses that are making $750 million or more. Everybody should be looking at the impact that makes on top of the tariffs that are already imposed on goods that are made in the United States of America. No one is talking about this, Margaret, and all these economists, we expect that these are going to be honest brokers, but they're not. We are not operating at, Yeah, you can go talk to the CEO of Ford, but what I'm dealing with is people I'm talking with when I visit factory floors each and every single day. I am an automotive supplier in the United States of America, and I feel this pain. We've seen it for too long. And like I've said, we've been taken advantage of for years, and we need to level the playing field. When you're not playing fair with America, then we have to do what we can to make sure that we can compete on a fair playing field. And Margaret, I think that fairness is what we should be pursuing. And I don't think that's wrong to ask for out of our allies and our partners.
The global supply chain, I know you know it well, is complicated here, and the production goes back and forth.
Yes, I have a master's in it, Margaret. I understand it, and I'm also in the automotive industry. Yes,
right, and well, what I'm trying to say is that the cars go back and forth across the border multiple times. So what is the construction of the tariffs that you think is actually going to be beneficial here?
You know, it also comes across the border, fentanyl coming in from Mexico, and China is sending in precursors. And as a result of these negotiation tactics, Mexico surged 10,000 of their own National Guard troops to the border. And just as you were mentioning in the last segment, I think it was great that border apprehensions on the southern border have plunged to the lowest levels this century. You know, this is working. Mexico is paying for the border security. They're extraditing drug lords to be prosecuted in the United States of America. And these are the types of things that we're looking for. 84% of those in the terror watch list and the FBI terror watch list are apprehended on the northern border. And we're getting Canadian cooperation, which would have never happened under the previous administration and only started when President Trump started playing hardball and talking about these things. We have a number of levers, diplomatic, economic, and military. And diplomatic levers haven't worked. We're using economic levers to secure our borders and to make sure that we have fairness across our economy.
All right. Thank you, Congressman James. We got to leave it there. President Trump's approval rating in our poll is 51%, still in positive territory, but by a smaller margin than he had a month ago. And on his approval on the issues, it's a mixed bag. A slim majority of voters approve of his handling of the border and the economy, while a slim majority disapprove of his handling of inflation. And we're joined now by our Elections and Surveys Director, Anthony Salvanto. You asked about a host of issues, Anthony, before this explosive Oval Office exchange. You did ask Americans how they're assessing the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. What did you learn?
Yeah, morning, Margaret. You can look at Ukraine and Russia and the conflict and then see a wider worldview that Americans have. So let me start with this. Aid to Ukraine specifically divides the country, divides it along partisan lines, and it has for a while. Democrats more in favor, Republicans more opposed. But then you ask people, okay, who do you support in the conflict? Just over half say they support Ukraine, and the rest say they're neutral, that the U.S. should stay out. Now, where this comes back to the administration is the people who say they're neutral are more approving of how Donald Trump is handling all this. The people who say they back Ukraine, in addition to supporting aid, feel that Trump's actions have favored Russia in this conflict. Now, let's take a look at views on Russia. And the big majority calls Russia either an enemy or unfriendly. It's a little less so among Republicans, but then widen out to how the U.S. should act on the world stage. Views of our European allies. By and large, Americans call them allies, or at the very least friendly, as Great Britain, France, Germany, etc. Now, what should the U.S. actually do? The big majority is cooperate with allies on the world stage. Those folks tend to be less approving of the changes that they see Donald Trump making to U.S. foreign policy.
So back to the key issue, the economy. How are Americans perceiving what the president is doing on that, as well as his cuts to the federal workforce?
Well, on the point about cuts, let's start with this sort of central premise about, is there waste in the federal government? By and large, Americans agree that there is. The difference is, where does it come from? If I ask people, is it poor spending choices? Is it fraud? Well, you get more Democrats saying it probably comes from poor spending choices, Republicans saying it comes from fraud. And then that goes into a split on the changes he's making in the federal workforce. That divides the country. And you start to see people looking at it and wondering about what the implications of this might be. So I ask, is this going to have an effect? There's a lot of people who say, yes, it will have an effect on cutting services that they like, an effect on their local area. But there's also just as many who say it's going to save taxpayer money. It's going to eliminate waste. And when I see that wide span of answers, what my sense is people are anticipating a lot of things. They're unsure at this point, but they are definitely looking and waiting to see what they believe will be an impact.
Anthony Salvanto, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Our Imtiaz Tayeb reports on reaction from Kyiv.
President Volodymyr Zelensky's warm welcome at 10 Downing Street couldn't have been more different than his reception at the White House.
What's your message to the US President?
He and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer later signed $2.8 billion worth of loans to Ukraine. Ahead of today's summit of presidents and prime ministers from across Europe, convened by Starmer.
European countries have to do more and provide a security guarantee. But I've always been clear that that is going to need a US backstop.
Alexander Merezko is the chairman of the Ukrainian government's Foreign Affairs Committee.
The issue of Ukraine is a crucial key issue for European security. Let's not forget that the final goal of Putin is not only destroying Ukraine, but also dominating the whole Europe.
The spectacle of an American president and vice president berating the leader of a war-torn ally has left Ukrainians reeling and European leaders scrambling to respond. It has also triggered delight from the Kremlin.
And I thought that Mr. Trump can play the role of new FDR, yes. But now we can see that we need to think about European role and Europe as a leader of the free world.
There's obviously another player here, and that's Russia. What do you think the mood in Moscow is right now?
I'm sure that they rejoice. Putin counted. He couldn't imagine that something like that such a gift can happen. But now things have changed, and it emboldens him. He thinks that he is right, and he can destroy Ukraine. That's why it's so dangerous.
A dangerous war which shows no sign of letting up. Overnight, there was another massive Russian drone attack in the eastern city of Zaporizhia that left a residential neighborhood devastated.
The free world needs a new leader, said the EU's top diplomat, Kallas, following that Oval Office meeting. We spoke with her Thursday about what Europeans are doing to help Ukraine.
We are coordinating, and of course the message is there are several layers. So one is that the fight that Ukraine is having is not only about Ukraine's sovereignty, but it's much, much broader. It's about freedom of the free world, really. It is about the world where international law applies and the world where might does not make right. It is clear that Russia attacked Ukraine. There's one aggressor and one victim.
But the Trump administration has decided now not to say that explicitly, arguing that the president needs negotiating room. Do you think that that's persuasive to Vladimir Putin?
Well, it is certainly, a very strong Russian narrative that they want to run to really push, saying that, oh, it's a conflict between two equal parties. It is very clear. One country attacked another country very brutally with force and is bombing Ukraine every day. I mean, President Trump says that he wants the killing to stop. I don't think that anybody wants the killing to stop more than the Ukrainians.
So why do you think acknowledging who is responsible does matter?
We have the United Nations Charter where we have agreed how countries are, interacting with each other. And it says very clearly that you can't attack a sovereignty, territorial integrity of another country. And if you do, there are consequences. And why is it important? It is important for small countries in the world for whom this is the only thing that protects them. If we don't really defend this principle, then we're going to see all these developments that we don't want to see, because all the countries who are afraid of their neighbors will want to go for nuclear weapons, because this is the only thing that protects them. It's not the international law anymore.
That's it for us today. Until next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.